Hi math students, this is our introduction video for our lesson on two-step equation word problems. Before we look at two-step equation word problems, I want to review what you've learned about one-step equation word problems. And I chose a story very similar to a story we saw in that past lesson. This first story says Israel works as a waiter, he makes $7 per hour, and he made a total of $42 yesterday. Write an equation to represent this story. Because we've done this in the past, go ahead, pause this video, try this problem, and then come back to see how you did. In that one-step word problem lesson, we learned that some things to do before you write your equation is identify your variable and identify what math operation the story is using. For this story, the thing we don't know, well, we know how much money he makes each hour, we know the total amount of money he made, but we don't know how many hours he works. So in our equation, I'm going to use h for my variable to represent the number of hours Israel works. The other thing that's going to help me write my equation is knowing the math operation. When we talk about making $7 per hour, that is a multiplication story. He makes $7 multiplied by the number of hours he works. So when I write my equation is going to say $7 per hour multiplied by the number of hours. And we've learned that if I write them next to each other like that, it means multiplication. Gives him his total equals his total $42. And so this is our one-step equation to represent the story. The second part says to solve our equation, and what does our solution tell us about Israel? In that one-step equation lesson, we learned that in order to solve a one-step equation, find your variable, find what math is happening there, and do the opposite. We just said 7h is multiplication, so the opposite is division. I want to divide both sides by 7. And when I do that, that gives me h equals 6. So I've done the first part, solved the equation. Here's my answer. Now, what does that answer, that solution, tell us about Israel? So is it 6 people, $6, 6 days? Because h is the number of hours Israel works, this is telling me Israel worked 6 hours. This is the part we learned back in our one-step equation lesson, and this is what we need to know to help us with today's lesson on two-step word problems. What I've done is I've changed the story just a little bit to show you what our stories in today's lesson will look like. So this is part 2. Our story in part 2 says Lisa works as a waitress. She makes $7 per hour. Last night she made $80 in tips and took home a total of $108. With our two-step word problems, you might notice that there's more happening in the story, and that's because there's going to be multiple operations. Before it was only multiplication, but now this story is describing more math. We still want to go through the same steps, so still identifying what math the story is describing and also identifying our variable. I left the story pretty similar, and so our variable is going to be the same thing. We can use h again to represent the number of hours Lisa works. I know she makes $7 per hour. I know she made $80 in tips. I know she took home a total of $108, but I still don't know how many hours she worked. When we talk about the math the story is describing, we still have that $7 per hour, and that is still multiplication. She makes $7 every single hour she works. This story also mentions that she made $80 in tips. When you make tips, that's extra money. So she's making $7 every hour she works, but she's also taking home $80 in tips. So that's going to be some addition in my equation. She makes this money plus the tip money. With your tips, they've given me the total. So there's no variable there. There's nothing I multiply 80 by. It's just the extra money. And then we know our total, $108. When we go to write our equation here, we still have the 7H from before. She makes $7 per hour, but then she's also making $80 in tips to equal that total $108. This is a two-step equation because there's two things happening. We're multiplying the $7 per hour and also adding in the $80 in tips. I think the biggest mistake I see students make when they write these two-step equations is maybe doing something like this, saying $7 for each hour plus $80 in tips to get the total $108. I don't need a variable on 80 because that would mean we're multiplying the $80 in tips by something, and we're not. That's already a number I know. There's nothing I don't know about it. The big mistake I see a lot of students making is putting letters next to every number as a way to name the number, and that's not what we're doing. I need H with my 7 because I don't know how many hours she works. I don't know what I'm multiplying 7 by. 80 doesn't need a variable. After we write our equation, this last part is review from yesterday's lesson, solving a two-step equation. So one last time, pause the video, solve this equation using what you've learned yesterday, and then come back to see how you did. We learned in yesterday's lesson that when you solve a two-step equation, you always start with your constant. That's that number that we add or subtract in the equation. And here, that's the number 80. To solve, we do the opposite. So the opposite of plus 80 is minus 80 on both sides. 80 minus 80 is 0, so we say that cancels. And my new equation says 7H equals 108 minus 80, which is 28. After that, our last step, same as the story above about Israel, this is multiplication, so I need to divide both sides by 7. And that gives me H equals 4. What does that mean? Well, H equals 4 tells me that Lisa worked 4 hours. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at more two-step equation stories like this one here about Lisa, and also practicing solving our two-step equations. Thanks so much for watching. You are ready for today's lesson.